Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from the Apostle's niece, and here's her story. I was raised in a strict religious sect, which was labeled as a cult by the media back in the 1970s. It was a large international organization with around 150,000 members worldwide, and it was founded by my uncle, who was a televangelist and radio preacher going back to the earliest days of broadcasting. I will refer to him as Uncle Belch because he was so full of hot air. He was the quintessential narcissist who could intimidate his top evangelists, men in their 40s and 50s, by raging at them until they cried like little girls. He had a commanding presence, even though he was a short little man in stature, and his church was not just a religious cult, but a cult of personality as well. He surrounded himself with yes men because he did not handle criticism well, and his ministers all acted like him, pompous and full of self-righteousness and judgment. They sounded angry to my young ears when they pounded on their podiums during services, with the exception of the opulent auditorium at church headquarters. Most services were held in gymnasiums or rented buildings, and there was no place for the children to go except to lay down on blankets in the aisles at their parents' feet. I remember laying down on my stomach and drawing for hours or tracing pictures of animals in an encyclopedia, while the ministers raged about how wickedness is born in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. The sermons could last anywhere from 2 to 5 hours, depending on how zealous the minister was, or how many times he can pass around that collection plate, right? Children, including myself, often got fussy and cried when we were dragged out by our mothers to the ladies' room, where we were scolded and spanked. My mother's favorite tool of punishment was a boar's bristle brush, all natural fiber, she was fond of saying. But at home, she would hit me with anything that was handy at the time. Wooden spoons, her hands, belts, willow switches, you name it. Spanking was encouraged in the church. Other parents hung wooden paddles on their walls with their children's names burned into them. So basically, it's a religious cult that likes hitting children, that likes abusing children, as most of them are anyway. Corporal punishment was enforced at Uncle Belch's private school, which I attended through the 3rd grade. If I talked too much in class, my frequent sin, I was taken out behind the building and told to bend over and hold my knees. We were spanked 3 times hard. Often when we got home, we could expect more punishment. All this is sadism, is sexual sadism on children. That's what that is. When you tell a child, I'm telling you, they're getting a sexual charge out of it. Some background on my parents. Mother had met my father, who was Uncle Belch's little brother, after divorcing her previous husband. The church had not recognized her previous marriage because her husband was an atheist, and members were not allowed to be married to unbelievers. So she had left him, bringing her 2 little daughters to live at the church's headquarters and work as a receptionist and telephone operator. She had met my father while caring for Uncle Belch's mother, who was ailing, and had romanced him and convinced him to marry her. My father was a good 18 years her senior. It's about children. Listen, it's always about children. 18 years, huh? My father was a good 18 years her senior, but emotionally he was a child. He suffered from spinal meningitis during his childhood in the early 1900s and had not been expected to live. He survived, but was mentally slow and unstable emotionally. He was, however, a brilliant musician who composed music for the violin and piano, and so Uncle Belch had given him a job writing for the hymnal for the church, and my mother, who had a beautiful singing voice, assisted him. By the time I was born, my 2 half-sisters, who were both boomers, more than 20 years older than me, had moved out, married, and were preparing to have families of their own. I often wondered if there was a competition between them and my mother. See, I'll tell you exactly what this was about. It was probably, if you're saying your father really was a little slow on the mental side, okay, what that was with that huge age difference once your half sisters were older. This is just about him expanding control, okay, for another generation, okay, past your boomer sisters into you. It's just like, all right, you gotta find somebody young so you can keep having kids and repopulating the cult. Mother was very competitive. It would be just like her to want to have a baby first to upstage her daughters. And it might explain why my boomer half-sisters hated me so much. My father had the same kind of volcanic temper as his brother, Uncle Belch, only he could not control it as well because of his mental impairment, and so he would burst into anger and snap if I did something or said something wrong, and there was no limit to what he might do when he was angry. He frequently beat me with his fists, his hands, or belt. He was always angry when he hit me. Once in my early teenage years, he threw me across a room. Another time when I was 11 or 12, Mom made him beat me with his seatbelt over and over while he stood there and gloated. Okay. This is just, your father ran out of children to beat. He just needed more people to beat. That's why they just like beating on children. So they'll just continue having children any way they can so they can continue to beat on them. Every time I gasped for breath, snap, the belt came down came the belt. Even if I made a sound while trying to swallow my tears, snap, down came the belt. When I was little, like under the age of 8, I got hit for things like dropping food on the carpet or not doing as I was told or asking what time it was too many times in church, or for screaming when Mom pulled my hair while she was brushing it. When I got older, I got hit more often for making fun of my parents or sassing them. When I pointed to the black and blue bruises all over my back, my mother would tell me that I had an overactive imagination. When I brought it up later in life, she would laugh and tell me I made it up, or that I had been too little to remember what really happened. But I remember it all clearly. My mother also had a raging temper and was emotionally abusive, although she could be physically abusive as well. One of my earliest memories is of her giving me a bath. It was between the ages of 4 and 7, and I know that because of the house we lived in at the time. I can still remember what the orange heat lamps in the bathroom looked like, even though I am 54 years old now. I refused to dunk my head under the water, so she shoved me under, and I can remember knowing that I was going to die. My mother used to do that to me because she refused. Get this. See, my mother refused when she used to give me baths to use Johnson. She used adult shampoo so it would burn my eyes. And then when I would cry, she'd shove me under the fucking water. They're all the same. They just like hurting their own children. Animals. I relaxed my body and stopped struggling, and that may be why she finally let me up to breathe. Other times, she would scream at me while she was brushing my hair and tear it out by the handfuls. She wanted me to look like Shirley Temple for church, and she had no patience when she was dressing me up. She told me I was possessed by demons, and she called me Little Hitler. The irony is, she was the one raging at me, purple in the face, while I was hiding under the bed. One time I woke up to see her standing over me, red-faced, holding a wooden chair over my head, which she was about to throw down at me. I don't remember what I did to make her so angry. I just remember jumping up out of the bed the instant before the chair hit, and then hiding in the trunk of her car. Growing up in the church, I had to memorialize I had to memorize all the books of the Bible and the Ten Commandments and recite them. As one of the apostles' family members, I was expected to set an example. But I was not popular at school, and I usually played by myself during recess. I was very lonely and wished I had friends, but other kids avoided me, and my only real friends were my nieces and nephews, who were very close to me in age. When I was 8, we moved out of state. Mother said it was because all the smog in the city was bad for me, but in reality, she wanted to leave the church, and Father did not want to leave. We lived in a large, sprawling villa with a koi pond and a little stream, a swimming pool, and a big garden. But it was owned by the church, and Uncle Belch could come and go as he pleased, since he had a key to the place. I learned later in life that sometimes when we weren't home, he would bring ministers in and show them our house. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in another state, and a couple months later, Dad went on a week-long fishing trip in Canada. While he was gone, Mom came out one day while I was playing and asked me if I would like to go to the state park. I always liked to go to the state park when I was 8. It was down by the beach, and I liked exploring and looking for crabs under the rocks or finding seashells. When she asked if I wanted to bring my toys, and I said yes. Then she asked if I'd like to bring more of my toys. Soon the whole car was packed up. When we reached the state park, she asked if I'd like to go back home, our old home, out of state, and I said yes. Later, she blamed me for this trip because I wanted to go home. But the trip was actually all about her trying to leave Dad. We drove back to town where we had lived, and of course, we couldn't go home. Other people were living in the villa now, so we stayed in hotels and Mom went shopping. Then we drove to the Midwest to visit her 2 daughters who moved there recently. I later learned that Mom was trying to hook up with their father again, but he had hung up on her when she called him. She had spent all the savings on her trip, but in the end, she went back to Dad. Using you, like an accessory. While we were living in the apartment, she blackmailed Uncle Belch for money to build a house, threatening to go to the media about how he molested his daughter. He always denied doing that publicly, but several family members said it was true. She built a remarkable house, which we moved into when I was 11. From the outside, it looked like I was spoiled rotten and I had everything I wanted, but behind the scenes I was neglected most of the times, and if I wasn't being neglected, I was being beaten. My father also had his brother's sexual appetites. He molested me when I was 9. I told you it was about the I'm telling you, that's why your father had you in the first place. Father had you so he could have another child to molest. Where did your sisters go? Where'd your half-sisters go? Well, that was your mother's sisters, so... I'm sorry, those were your mother's daughters, so... He did not actually have sex with me, but made me play with his penis, saying it was education. I believe that my mother had taught him to say that, maybe even to believe it. So your mother knew. So your mother knew the whole time. Your mother's just garbage. Your mother, she don't go to the police. Like, she gets her house built. She gets a house built knowing these people molested her own daughter. And this isn't a new mother. This was a mother who had her after she was an adult. After she had adult children. Her half-sisters are all 20 years her senior. I remember being 8 or 9 and staying at a hotel in Canada where my mother made me watch her and Daddy having sex. She also used me as her emotional crutch, often telling me in disgusting detail about the affairs she was having with the various men who helped her build the house. She described things like oral sex and what semen tasted like, and showed me pornography. I started acting out, playing having sex with other children who lived in the apartments. Mother caught us doing that in my room one time, and instead of punishing us, she encouraged us to continue while she watched. I felt ashamed and ugly, and I believed something was wrong with me. But from the outside, it looked like I had the ideal childhood. When I was 13, Mom sold the house she had built and told everyone that she had to sell it so she could get me a horse. In reality, though, she sold it because she felt guilty. Her little brother, who had been one of Uncle Belch's top evangelists, had also left the church and lost his big salary and all his world traveling benefits in the process. He was an alcoholic and he lost everything he had, including his house, to his wife, who tried to starve herself to get him to quit and ended up getting sick and dying. So she felt guilt over her brother, but not over her own daughter. Our new house was much smaller and had less land, but I had horses to ride from that point on. Whenever I needed to get away, I would ride my horse. I rode into the mountains or down to the beach. I would ride for hours and sometimes all day and into the night just to stay away from them. Sometimes I rode with my cousin, hatchet-faced manhunter. She was the adopted daughter of my mother's little brother, the fallen evangelist, and she was horrible to me. We went to the same school, and she always picked on me to impress her friends on the bus. Well, imagine, but here's the thing with hatchet-faced manhunter. Think about what you went through. Think about who her father is, her adopted father is, and what she must have been going through as well. So her attacking you probably had a lot of less to do with you and more to do with her fucking father. When we went riding, we always had to go where she wanted to go, which inevitably turned out to be some place she could go hook up with boys. I had no interest in boys at that age. I was crazy about horses, but she liked dragging me along to her liaisons with her various boyfriends for reasons I could not fathom at the time. I would sit around and twiddle my thumbs while she made out and screwed her various boyfriends. Her boyfriends would make fun of me while talking about how sexy hatchet-faced manhunter's ass was. I remember one of them saying to me, "You have a nice ass." She gave him an angry look, and he hastily added, "But her ass is nicer." Hatchet-faced manhunter often abused her horse, a big black gelding with a bad temper. She was an active 4-H and liked showing him and bragged about all her ribbons. I didn't fare so well at horse shows, and she always laughed at me when I came out with the 5th place ribbon or nothing at all. Horse shows bored me. I liked riding in the woods or on the beach. Mostly I loved racing, feeling the power of a galloping horse under me and the wind in my hair. When hatchet-faced manhunter was 17 and she got pregnant. By 18 she was married to a Marine and moved away to Camp Pendleton while he went overseas to Okinawa. That's the last I ever saw of her, for a while anyway. As I said before, my best friends as a child were my nieces and nephews who were close to me in age, with my oldest nephew only a year younger than me. They are Gen Xers, and I'm technically neither a boomer nor Gen Xer, but whatever came between. Generation Jones is that sliver. I've heard it referred to as the shadow generation, and that it is often how I felt, like a shadow. There was no room for me. Mother was bigger than life, and everything was always about her. I always looked forward to the summers when my half-sister's kids would come stay with us. I had no one to play with growing up, and my parents were always busy writing a hymnal or engaged in other adult things, so I played by myself, often making up long, elaborate stories about my toy animals and narrating out loud. Mother bragged about this behavior. See, she entertains herself. She liked how I never got bored and always found something to do. But I think she was just justifying how little attention she really gave me. She did not teach me how to brush my hair or how to dress myself or anything. Either she did it for me or I did it by myself. There was no in between. She was very impatient, and the few times she had tried to teach me, I would do something wrong, and she would get angry and just do it for me while glaring at me and telling me I couldn't do anything right. I went to school with big snarls in my hair, wearing hatchet-faced manhunter's hand-me-downs. I played by myself and talked to myself out loud. I didn't fit in at school, and I was bullied mercilessly by both girls and boys who called me class dog. I can remember a boy punching me in the stomach and a teacher looking on and doing nothing. My mother's advice to me, tell them Jesus loves them. Yeah, right, Mom. As you can imagine, that just made them bully me even more. I did eventually start teaching myself how to dress, brush my hair, and take a shower. I hated baths for many years. But Mother would often come into the bathroom while I was taking a shower, going into the toilet, or going to the toilet. She had disabled the block on the bathroom door, as they all do. As they all do. She always claimed that she was coming in to get towels or something, but I knew she was coming in to look at me, and it made my skin crawl. At 18, my oldest sister, whom I will call Wannabe Shrink, invited me to come live with her and live with her family in California, supposedly so that I could be a star. I was very enthusiastic about acting at that age, and I wanted to get away from my parents, so I swallowed her lure and went to live with her family for a year. Which brings me around to why I'm calling her Wannabe Shrink. She was studying at community college to be a psychologist. She never did finish her degree, but that didn't stop her from practicing on people. There were others who lived in her house besides me, whom... You do realize I'm not a therapist, right? Or a psychologist, right? So I just want to make that clear here, of Hassel's niece. You understand this is all just my opinion. Just want to reiterate that. There were others who lived in her house besides me who she practiced her bizarre brand of therapy on. She had joined a Pentecostal church, and she blended what she had learned about psychology with her religion. She made us join prayer circles and speak in tongues and scream in the pillows. One time I refused to join in a prayer circle, and her husband punched me in the face. Religion and narcissism. It's all about personality control, emotional control. That's what it is. That's what organized religion is. I was not allowed to call my parents or speak to them while I was in her house. She told me it was time to cut the umbilical cord. At first, it seemed like she wanted to help me. She shared a lot of her own horror stories about Mom. Wannabe Shrink had been the scapegoat, while my other half-sister had been mostly neglected and ignored. But Wannabe Shrink had never gotten any professional help for her own issues with Mom, and yet she felt qualified to help me with mine. So I learned that while she was pretending to help me, what she was really doing was far more insidious. Her kids, who had been my closest friends growing up, were gradually turning against me. They made fun of me and began to avoid me unless they needed me to drive them somewhere or buy them something. Go easy on them, Wannabe Shrink said. It's not easy to realize their idol has clay feet. As a child, I had always thought of myself as a kind of Pippi Longstocking. I was the creative one, always making up games to play and other things to do, and it seemed like we always had fun together, right? But they're probably looking at you as you're replacing them, because their mother's now bringing you in as a replacement. That's what they're reading. But now nothing I did was right. I became Wannabe Shrink's project. Right, exactly. But they're seeing it as that you're replacing them. And I'm sure they have their own issues with their mother as well. Much later in life, I came to understand that her goal had been to make me move out on my own so that she could be Mom's golden child. More on that later. My mother sent me money to pay for rent and other expenses while I was there, and this made my sister jealous. She demanded money too, even though she was in her 40s, and her husband made a very nice salary as a surveyor for the state. She claimed that she needed a new washer and dryer, but when the money came, she and her hubby went away on a weekend trip to San Francisco and blew it all on themselves. That's what boomers do. It's all about them. Wannabe Shrink made me attend Pentecostal services and pray in tongues. It gave me the creeps. One time, she and her enabling hubby drove me out into the desert to some church made of stone and made me speak to the church counselor about my demons. I remember telling the counselor that I didn't feel comfortable at the Pentecostal church, and so she told me that I had a spirit of unbelief. Gee, think. Crazy. Crazy. My sister was always trying to get into my head and convince me that there was something deeply wrong with me. She would find my drawings and analyze them in some twisted way to try to convince me that I was possessed by demons and had some dark sexual hang-up. One time I drew a spaceman on another planet riding a creature that had horns on its head. I spent several days on that drawing and had it framed and gave it to her as a gift. She looked at it with a frown on her face and told me that the horns represented penises and that it had revealed a lot about my subconscious state. Oh, God. All right, now I see why you're calling it wannabe shrink. Holy shit. Oh, my God. She did hang on the drawing on her wall while she was still living with her. She did hang the drawing on a wall while I was still living with her, but many years later, when I was going through some of my mother's things, I found the picture in storage. It had been there for many years, and I realized my sister never loved me, and she certainly didn't treasure my work or want it in her house. And understand something, the thing about that's all her projection. That's all her crazy, crazy ass projection. Mother had always bragged about my talents, but only so that she could take credit for them. She would often remark, she gets it from me. I was talented musically and artistically. I drew and made sculptures and composed music on the piano and sang. But while Mother bragged about me and trotted me out like a circus pony, whenever family or friends visited, privately she was constantly criticizing. Yep, that's the way it always is. I was never good enough. I remember her raging at me when I was 8 because I colored outside the lines. She would also compete with me. If I drew something, she would draw something next to it. If I sang, she had to sing, and she was always better than me. She had sung special music during church services and was well known for her operatic voice. I could not even get through a song without her interrupting me to nitpick. That sounds nasally. You need to sing more from your diaphragm. Always the competition. What a shock. A woman who was just put all her value in her vagina between one man and the next, would be competing with her own daughter. That makes a lot of sense, obviously. A few shreds of confidence I had left by age 18 were being scraped away by wannabe shrink that year at her house. That was the year I began studying Russian. To this day, I don't know what made me interested in Russia. I guess I didn't understand why there was a Cold War and why our countries had nuclear weapons aimed at each other. I bought Russian grammar books and tapes and began teaching myself the language. I also read books by Russian authors, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Solzhenitsyn. Wannabe shrink and her kids thought it was weird that they were embarrassed by my strange obsession. What they thought was cool was watching soap operas and fitting in at school. I was told I need to fit into a social group and stop trying to be so different. Eventually, because I was being shamed for being unemployed, I managed to find work as a housekeeper for a wealthy family. I made just enough money to get my own apartment. Wannabe shrink seemed nonplussed that I was leaving. She also had no emotional reaction to it whatsoever. Neither did her kids. They really didn't seem to care where I went or what happened to me. I only lived on my own for a couple months before I reconnected with my mom and moved back home with her. By then, my father, who was 80 years old, was dying of prostate cancer. Mother was home hospicing him. Another phrase I didn't know at the time. She had long been a practitioner of herbal medicine because in the church it was forbidden to see a doctor unless you had broken bones. It was seen as a lack of faith in God. This sounds like science. This sounds like the big one. Little children died of appendicitis because their parents refused to get medical treatment. Is this like Christian Science? It sounds like Christian, either Scientology or Christian Scientists. Little children died of appendicitis because their parents refused to get medical treatment for them. Instead, they would call a minister and have their children anointed with holy oil. My mother had treated people with herbal medicine and believed she was a healer. She often told me that it ran in the family because her mother and grandmother were both nurses. But see, and the people that do that, to deny their children medical treatment, are playing God. Are playing God. And that's what your mother was trying to do. Your mother's now playing God. They like to hurt people. They like to hurt, specifically, children. But Mom's way of treating people frightened me. She often had friends, disciples more like, who came to her for treatment. I remember one woman passing out on our couch after drinking some of Mom's foul-smelling herbal tea. Her skin was cold and clammy to the touch and her breathing was shallow, but Mom refused to call for help. She hated doctors. The woman ended up okay, but the whole episode scared me. I had grown up with her treating me. She was angry with me whenever I got sick and blamed me for rebelling. That is, refusing to take the giant vitamins that look like horse pills, or refusing to eat the chewy 7-grain bread, or daring to grab fast food at McDonald's. I realize now that she was ashamed because it made her look bad when her own daughter got sick, since she was supposed to be such a great healer. Her favorite treatments were called flushings. Most people refer to them as enemas. She liked to stick a rubber tube up people's butts and then flush them out with hot water. This was done to me many, many times as a child. Sexual sadism. That's what these narcissistic religious cults, it's about sexual sadism on children. It's horrible. That's all your story is. This is just one excuse after another to be sexually sadistic to a child. Ooh, this is getting demonetized. She did this to members of the church too. It was painful and violating, yet she could not seem to understand why everyone wasn't begging for one. So let me shove this up your ass. God, thank God, Drunken didn't hear about this. I would have been in the same goddamn church getting wait a minute, you could give enemas under the fucking under the direction of God? Oh, fuck. Oh, God. You died too soon, Drunkie. This would have been it for you. She was so obsessed with flushing, she would try to talk about it with everyone who would listen. Hey, let me shove this up your ass. Even guests who are having dinner with us. You have 35 feet of intestines, she would begin. And how much the shock and discomfort of our guests and the dinner conversation would revolve around fecal matter. Awesome. Did she pull out the hose, right? Hey, I could hook you up right now. Yeah, why not? After my father's death, when I was 19, Uncle Belch invited me to fly with him on his private jet to Japan. Of course, I was thrilled about this opportunity since the farthest I had gone up until that point was Mexico and Canada. We stayed in the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo in the President's Suite. He told me that President Nixon stayed there when he visited Japan. At the time, it was the finest hotel in Tokyo. As I remember of his entourage, I had to stay close to Uncle Belch at all times because he was trying to get in to see the Prime Minister, and that could happen at a moment's notice. This is what he did. He spent the money that was tilted to him by the church members on trips like this, where he would meet with world leaders calling himself an ambassador of peace. He'd get a photo of himself with them and write up a news bulletin for the membership about how he's spreading the word of God. He often bestowed generous gifts on these world leaders, endowments and funding from various charities and so forth, which was how he wormed his way in to meet them in the first place. Sometimes they even presented him with awards, medals, and honorary titles. His mansion was full of lavish gifts, which he kept on display. We met with the CEO of Japan's largest company at the time, but did not get to meet with the Prime Minister during 4 days we were in Tokyo. Uncle Belch held a huge banquet in his own honor at the Imperial Hotel, and many dignitaries attended, such as diplomats and actors. Toshiro Mifune of Seven Samurai fame was there sitting at the head table with my uncle. They served Kobe beef and truffle soup. I felt awkward, out of place, sitting at the table with the ambassadors from Kenya and Thailand. That banquet must have cost a fortune, and the church members often went without basic needs, so they could donate as much as 40% of their income. But that's how Uncle Belch got around. At night, I sneaked out and ate sushi at a restaurant downstairs. Uncle Belch would have been furious if he'd known, because in his church, shellfish was considered unclean. As it turned out, Uncle Belch was impressed by my talent. I had made him a sculpture of Alexander the Great on horseback, and he ordered the men in his woodworking department to build an elaborate pedestal to place it on and a glass cover to protect it. Now it sat in his living room, surrounded by many awards and gifts from heads of state. He wanted me to come to his college to study. He had founded 3 religious colleges to train ministers and ministers' wives for future service in the church. 2 of the campuses were in the U.S. and the 3rd was in Britain. I did not really want to go to a strict religious college. I had been homeschooled all during high school, supposedly because of how much I was bullied. But in reality, I was suspect it was because Mother wanted me there to take care of her. She often mentioned how in China, the youngest child was expected to take care of their parents. I did not want to wind up an old maid caring for my mother, but I enjoyed the freedom of galloping my horse on the beach. So I was torn about whether to take advantage of this opportunity, but in the end I decided to take up my uncle on the offer. Students in Uncle Belch's colleges often traveled around to serve the world on many foreign projects that the church offered, that I had a thirst for traveling. All he wanted me to do was pay for my half of the education by working. He would even provide me with a job. So I said goodbye to my mother and my horse and went off to college at the age of 20. I will end letter number 1 here. I'm sorry the story is so long, but I really need to get it on paper. I'm leaving out so much. It's amazing to tell. It's amazing how much there is to tell. One day I really do intend on writing a memoir about all this, but not until I've escaped the situation I am in now and have something more helpful to pass on to others. Again, thank you, Ollie, for telling my story. I will send the next letter as soon as I can come up with something to donate. Respectfully, the Apostle's Niece. It's another lifelong sexual cult is what you're in. Targeted at children. Okay. The time and time and time and time again, opportunity after opportunity after opportunity that your mother took to fail you repeatedly. Whether it be sending you to your sisters, knowing that your father molested you and doing nothing about it, still allowing you or having anything to do with the church, this church or religion or whatever the fuck it is. She's garbage. She's garbage. The fact that at this point, after your father, after all of that, and she's trying to get, and she's still allowing you. Doesn't stop you. Still goes back to him. Blackmails him for money. And you're just nothing more than another pawn. So, tough story. But I hope this helped. Thank you so much for your contribution and story, Apostle's Niece. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to have a private video made, sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been the Narcissistic Resistance. Take care.